And welcome to Quackaholics Anonymous, episode 11. This particular week, I want to talk about an article that I've seen floating around on the web and on social media for a little while now. But the caption of the article, the title of it says, "The opposite of addiction is connection." And there are some points in that article, poignant points, that I totally agree with. In fact, I've seen it even posted in some anti-AA groups. The disturbing thing, though, is I've also seen some AA members, the few that I've kept around on the news feed and the social media stratosphere, I guess you could call it for want of a better word, have also posted that same article. And like all cases of confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance, the minute they saw the article about connection and addiction, they immediately assumed, oh, well, that proves that AA is right. So I'm kind of here to try to destroy that because you can't have connection in overcoming your addictions, and you probably need positive connections in your life if you're trying to overcome problems. I know that a few times I tried to quit drinking in the early days. I was surrounded by, I come from a very highly dysfunctional family, and I'm not going to go into all the details about it. It would be like, you could buy 2 tickets to a tragic opera and you'd probably get the general idea. But it was kind of an unhealthy environment for me. And I was getting even more unhealthy advice in the rooms of Quackaholics Anonymous. So I'm going to first talk about bad connections and how bad connections can even be more detrimental to fighting your addiction problems and even more of a setback than a positive connection. I mean, of course, I don't think anybody would argue that you can do anything or accomplish anything in life alone. I mean, there's many things that I've accomplished over the course of my life, some of it almost unbelievable if I wanted to really brag on myself. But the truth of the matter is, I didn't do that solely on my own operation. However, quitting drinking or quitting drugs, while there are a variety of influences that can help you along the way, that is one thing you ultimately do and do alone. And if you have managed to put the drinking problem behind you or the drug problem behind you, you can take credit for that because you actually did that on your own. Granted, you might have had positive people along the way that might have helped you up, and you might have had a few I guess you could almost say a few instances of good luck. I mean, honestly, there's a couple of things I can look back on in my life, and I can actually say, if that minor little event hadn't happened, then who knows how the situation would have gone. And not going to get into the AA pseudo-religious quackaholic doublespeak that they're all so fond of, because on the surface, and I think I'm actually going to call this video I want to call it "Selling the Drama" after that old tune by Live in the 1990s, if anyone remembers it. But I won't rip off the title for that. I'll just call it "Selling the Snake Oil." Selling the snake oil poison, I think, would be more apt, because in order for a cult or any kind of weird, semi-religious, whatever the hell it is that AA does, or any kind of organization that even remotely resembles it, to have any modicum of success, it has to have something on the surface for people to fall for it. It's like every con artist that makes a lot of money off of innocent people, they don't do it by knocking on your door or calling you on the phone and saying, I'm here to rip you off, I'm here to steal your money, and I'm here to take advantage of you. They don't do that. They have an idea that's usually a little bit too good to be true, and then by the time you've been exploited and ripped off, it's a little bit too late. And I don't have no sympathy for con artists at all. And I think AA is like a breeding ground for con artists. There's so many of them in there. But there are things on the surface that they hook you with. There are things that they entice you with that at first it sounds like a good thing. I mean, I've had people in the real world that know nothing about being in Quackaholics Anonymous that would say things to me like, well, I mean, it does help people quit drinking, or it's done some good things for people, so why do you so vehemently oppose it? Well, I'm going to go into the territory of making a claim. I'm going to say that AA does not do a lot of good things for a lot of people. I know somebody will probably have to pop up and say, well, I haven't had a drink in 19 years, and it's because of AA. And have you ever noticed how they start throwing these personal antidotes at you if you're critical of the overall big picture? You could take an organization of any type, and one or two people in it could say, well, this made my life wonderful, but it doesn't really stand up if you look at the overall evidence as a whole. In other words, if you look at the big picture, not so successful. It's successful only because it's provided you with an outlet to be a big shot as an old timer, but it hardly proves it's successful. It hardly proves that it actually does help people. So the claim I'm going to make is AA harms people way more often than it does helping people. And what my point on this, where I'm going to build on this, is that when they say the opposite of addiction is connection, the one thing that I would have added to the article if I'd been writing it would have been good connection, positive connection, not an organization that's going to make you write down all these made up defects of character, defect of character. I mean, basic human nature, okay, is complex. I mean, there's no, absolute right, absolute wrong, at least from my personal opinion and my personal standpoint. Uh, Human nature in general is complex. It's comprised of destructive. It's comprised of what's the opposite of destruction? I wasn't going to use the word creation, but you get the idea. Any act that a person can make that's a bad action or a good action. It's all part of our makeup as people. I mean, I know that a few people on here may be old enough to remember the old black and white movies way back when they did westerns, and you had the hero over here, and he was all dressed up in white. He had the white cowboy hat, and he's just the epitome of the good guy. And then over here you had the guy that's dressed all in black, and he's the epitome of the evil one, and everything's so clear cut. It went that way in westerns for a lot of years until the late '60s, and you had people like Clint Eastwood come along, and you couldn't really tell the difference between them and the bad guys so much. But you get the idea of what I'm talking about. But in AA, they take basic things that are already ingrained in human nature, good or bad, positive or negative, and they turn them into something they call character defects, and they make you feel like you're the most worthless human being because you have faults or because you have failings. They make you constantly grovel before them. They make you constantly inventory yourself, or you inventory yourself all the time to the point that you can't even get up in the middle of the night and go to the bathroom without looking at your part in it. Maybe if you flush the toilet, it might wake somebody up, and that's because you're selfish and you're full of pride and all of that other kind of garbage that you hear in there. One positive example of a connection, before I go a little bit more in depth about the snake oil poison. When I got into cognitive behavioral therapy, and I was in my first session with my therapist, and I don't remember, we didn't cover too much in the first session, but I remember he was explaining to me about projection, and he was explaining to me about, panic and those kinds of things. But the one thing he drew out for me in an example, he says, well, every single human being on the planet feels that way. Okay, everybody does. I feel that way, he even said, and we were even talking about trivialities, like, you wake up in the morning and your car has got a flat tire, and the first thing that runs through your mind is, a bit of a panic, but there's also all kinds of lingering ideas about, what if it happens again, or what am I going to do if this happens, or that thing happens, et cetera, et cetera. And, the answer he gave to me in a simple, innocuous situation like that is everybody has that same reaction. Everybody does. If you're in the rooms of Quackaholics Anonymous, they'll tell you, you're being ruled by fear and you're selfish, and they'll heap a lot of garbage on top of that. But it gave me a positive connection with him, almost a trustworthy connection with him, because he wasn't preaching to me about steps and meetings and getting the faith or whatever it is. There's, with all the stuff they're trying to sell to you in there. He was, it was a connection man to man. Of, something, I have the same worries and the same kinds of fears and the same kind of reactions you do. The mouse in my computer goes out and I start worrying about my hard drive maybe going out next. It's not uncommon. It's not a big deal. And that was a positive connection for me because it had been so long since anyone had talked to me man to man like that, because I'd been surrounded by cult people, for almost over a decade, and if I had even tried to talk about something as trivial as that, they would have turned it into a big sermon and turned it into a big inventory thing and tried to attack you subtly by saying it's your ego and it's your selfish nature and, all that other vile garbage. I mean, I'm just so happy that I don't have to listen to that anymore. I'm even more happier that I don't have to buy into that anymore. But this is how AA sells you the snake oil, because on the surface, they don't start out preaching to you like that. I never really liked the idea of the way they do newcomers meetings, to be honest. I mean, that's where everybody tries to advertise what a big badass they were before they got to AA. And really and truly what they're doing is they're saying, I'm the most miraculous person here. For those of you out there, you know what I'm talking about with these newcomer meetings. Somebody's got to talk about how they had 100 DUIs and 100 felonies and were living on the streets and were a drug cartel and in with the major drug dealers, eating out of garbage cans, But today, because of the steps, I'm 20 years sober and my life is wonderful, It's a subtle way of them actually saying, I'm the best person here is what it is. But everybody tries to sell you this picture that we're all such hopeless people, by the time we get to AA. And of course, if you're not hopeless enough, you might not be ready, which is another ugly way of treating new people when you don't know anything about them. But an enticing part of that is you're kind of sitting there, maybe you're a new guy, maybe you got a bit of a drinking problem, and you say, well, I mean, these are some people that understand what it's like to have a drinking problem, and they're sober today, at least it appears that way when you're new and you don't know what all goes on behind the scenes like I do now. And so maybe these people can help me. So they've kind of subtly drew you in a little bit by giving you this phony picture, this not real picture of what's really going on, by telling you, all we really are is just a nice group of people that are just like you that had a drinking problem, and now we don't have a drinking problem anymore, and you won't have one either if you hang around with us. They've kind of not told you the whole complete story there, if you really think about that, because I've actually heard people over the years when I was trapped in those rooms that would say things like, you don't want to tell them too much in their first meeting. You don't want to scare them away. You don't want to confuse them. And when you really think about that, that's kind of a form of deceptive recruiting. We're not going to tell you everything on the surface that really goes on in here because you wouldn't understand it and you might not stay. There's no organization that I know of that operates like that. Okay, I've said here before that I'm a pagan. If someone asked me any questions or anything, I'd be more than happy to explain it to them. And if they didn't like it, I'd say, well, maybe this isn't what you want. If I went to any Christian church or any whatever, and I said, this is how I feel and this is how I believe and this is how I see things, I'm pretty sure they would probably say, well, this isn't what we're about. This isn't for you. You're welcome to stay. You're welcome to listen. You're welcome to do whatever, but you can't be a member here if that's how you believe. They tell you right on the front end when you're going in. I mean, any organization that I'm aware of, even if it's something as innocuous as a horror movie fan club, okay, they tell you on the front end. Like I'm in a group of people on the social media that's interested in underground horror, in underground gore, and they tell you before you join them, they say that there's a lot of pictures in here that could be quite shocking. If you're not a hardcore horror movie fan, you might want to consider not joining. They tell you that on the front end, okay? And I'm not some kind of weirdo gorehound that gets off on looking at car crashes or something like that. I'm not trying to paint myself in that way, but any organization will tell you on the front end, this is what we're about, this is what we believe, this is what we do, think about it, or maybe if this isn't for you. AA doesn't do that. AA starts out by telling you, you don't want to scare the newcomers away too much. So, you don't want to talk too much about the God thing. You don't want to talk too much about this, that, and the other. You want to keep them coming until they're hooked. And then you want to reveal the true picture hiding behind the scenes. Kind of reminds me of a story. I'm a big horror fan, so we might as well get that out of the way. But there's a story by Ray Bradbury I read a long time ago, and I remember being real creeped out about it. But it was called Mars is Heaven, and these astronauts land on Mars, and they find out that it's this heavenly wonderful paradise. It's like a town out of a Norman Rockwell painting. You got your corner stores, you got your hangouts, and you got the peaceful farms with the running dogs. It's picture perfect. It's a wonderful place. Everybody just loves it there. And then later on that evening, they go to bed, and the true face of the Martians are revealed, and they're actually cannibalistic style monsters that kill these guys that were in a place that looked like heaven on the surface. That's a pretty extreme example, but I think it's almost apt about what goes on in the rooms of Quackaholics Anonymous. When I first got a sponsor, part of the deceptive recruiting, they start out by trying to tell you it'll just be somebody that listens to your problems and listens to your concerns, and somebody that's just gonna help you, on your little road or on your little transition. And I quickly learned over the years, I've had so many sponsors, and I mean, the last one I had was the epic pile of shit of piles of shit. I mean, even the other scumbags thought of him as a scumbag, but they all operated basically on the same level. They were all kind of on this power trip of, you're a new guy, you know nothing, and of course, I was gullible enough to believe it at the time. I fell for the freaking snake oil poison. I says, well, I can't go a week without getting fucked up and drunk. So, this guy's saying he hadn't done it 20 some odd years, so he must know something. He must have some secret key to some knowledge or something like that. But you get a little bit further in, and you start really reading. That was the funny thing. They used to tell me all the time how new people don't hardly ever read the books, and they don't hardly ever study the literature and all that. Well, I actually did. And the more I read, the more disturbing the picture got. I mean, it was. I won't go into a lot of detail about my first, fourth, and fifth step. I did a few of those, and I wished I'd never done any of them because they ended up being broadcast all over the meetings behind my back, and they were nothing really horrible. I mean, I'm not some whack job serial killer with bodies in his refrigerator or something like that. But some of it was a little bit private, and some of it was a little bit embarrassing. And all of a sudden everybody in the meetings, knows about it, and this is for people that you supposedly trust. But one of the main aspects of the Quackaholic Anonymous religion that I've noticed is they paint this convincing picture to you as a new person that they all have their shit together, that they all are really walking this weird walk that they're doing, and that they're really interested in your well-being, and at first, I would see the angry old timers, saying everybody needs to shut the fuck up while I'm talking, and all the bloated, overblown gas bags that just love to hear the sound of their own voice. And I actually was convinced on some level, maybe these people, I don't know, I'm not getting it. I'm really not getting it. I don't understand what everybody's seeing here, but I must be missing something because I keep getting drunk and they don't. Of course, when you get behind the scenes, you find out it's a whole different ball game. Oh yeah, I can tell you all about all kinds of illegal drug usage and all kinds of and people who are still actively drinking. I remember one guy that said, "Well, I just drink wine." This is a guy that's in meetings saying that God removed the desire for him to drink, but he just drinks wine now. And but on the surface, they paint this picture: we're all sober, you're not. And really and truly, when you think about it, that's the subtle brainwashing right at work right there. Because if you're anything like I was, I mean, I'm ripping off a bit of a cult slogan there with that one. They always say, well, if you're anything like me, okay. But seriously, when I was first in there, I really felt isolated. I felt alienated. I felt all screwed up. I didn't fit in anywhere. I mean, I had really pretty much unraveled a major portion of my life. Not really nothing that dramatic. Everybody was up my ass about my drinking. My boss, was more or less saying you can't come to work drinking all the time. My wife was pretty upset about it. And so I was I was pretty out there in confusion. And, I'm being told continually by these people who are sending me mixed signals, that I'm the one who's all fucked up. And the one way that a cult operates really well, because if you hang around it for any period of time, you find yourself becoming increasingly more and more isolated from the rest of the real world. I mean, the early sponsors, they really sold me on this cult indoctrination thing, 90 meetings in 90 days, and, go to 2 and 3 meetings if you have to, and all of this. And it really drove a wedge between me and the outside world. I mean, in the early days. I mean, I worked and I went to meetings, and even a couple of times, some of the more hardcore family members that are assholes in real life that I don't even talk to today would say things like, well, you're really spending a lot of time in those meetings. I mean, and of course, the way the cult isolates you, I went to a meeting one time and I shared that. I said, my family is saying I'm spending too much time in these meetings. And of course, everybody, with their wicked cartoon villain laughter. And it was more of a feeling there again, it's more subtle manipulation. I'm thinking to myself, well, these people do understand me. And, that was the early days. And, the longer I hung around, the longer I stayed, the more I began to realize the picture they're selling is an increasingly ugly picture. It's a nasty picture. I mean, you're never going to get well. You're never going to get better. You're never going to heal. You're never going to move on. You're always going to be constantly told that you have to go to meetings, that you have to have sponsors, that you have to keep reworking these steps. And it doesn't actually work, okay? Even if it was some ugly, dour, puritanical type religion that actually did work, okay, it would be one thing that I would still argue against it. I mean, I'm going to be like an eternal rebel on anything anyway, but it doesn't even work. I went through all 12 of those steps, and I watched multiple people around me and multiple people I friended over the years go through all 12 of those things, and it only seemed to break their self-esteem more. It seemed to make them focus on their own selves even more. It seemed to make them almost it's almost like the old 1970 movie, not the dreadful remake in the 2000s, but it was almost like the Stepford Wives. You come in there and you see people that's got some modicum of independence about them that can think for themselves, and in like 6 months, all of a sudden they're like aliens. You can't even recognize them. Some of the friends I made over the years were like that. They came in, they were ordinary guys like me. We like the same musicians, we like the same music, we like the same books. We had commonalities other than just Quackaholic Anonymous meetings. And then 5 months later, they have a bad relapse and they end up in treatment, and then they end up back in the meetings, and then all of a sudden they're like totally programmed machines. It's like you can't even talk to these people anymore. They just spout slogans and ignore you. And when you try to actually talk to them about anything outside a program, all of a sudden they're high and mighty and they're preaching down to you. It's almost like when you get in too deep, it's too late. When you get in too deep after a period of time, it's like all of a sudden you look around one day, you wake up one morning and you think, I don't know anyone in the world that's not involved in this cult. I have no real people to talk to. I have nothing but this to look forward to for the rest of my life. And you end up, I finally on that first relapse was thinking, I'd rather be drunk than listen to this horrible, boring melodrama of just self-hatred. It's for you if you're a relapser like I was. Now, if you're an old timer, it seemed like the one thing in life that they had to look forward to was being mean-spirited to people in meetings. I mean, I don't know about anybody else. Christ, I just said that again. I'm going to try to strike that out of my English language. But I really, truly cannot say for sure what everyone else would feel on this matter. But I would like to think there's a lot more to life than just sitting in meetings and being a bullying asshole and preaching at people. I mean, is that the most that anyone is supposed to look forward to in the recovery community? Is that recovery even? I mean, I actually had hobbies and things I did in my real life, before I got kind of sucked into all that garbage. I mean, and all of it started taking a back seat, I mean, and even the cult itself would discourage it. I'd hear them say things like, well, the big book says worldly clamors. I'm like, all you people do is recite big book lines and sit in here. I mean, you accomplish nothing. You dream of nothing. It used to crack me up no end when I'd hear these people that were old timers that would say, I have a life beyond anything I've ever dreamed. I'm like, well, I mean, what life? Your life is coming to 3 meetings a day and getting called on so you can talk about what you did when you were drunk back in the 1970s and repeating other people's stuff behind their back. That was another thing. They told me, stick with these winners. This is another thing that doesn't make any sense to me. There's no losers in recovery, but stick with the winners. And the winners to me looked like really abhorrent people. They weren't the kind of people I wanted to achieve to win, but the cult brainwashing was so strong that I actually went through a period of saying to myself, there must be something wrong with me. I mean, there's got to be something mentally wrong with me. If all these people are believing this, and I'm not believing it, and I keep drinking, I mean, it's bound to be me, right? Well, it's such a relief today to say that I don't have to be trapped into and I brought it up before on videos, the false dichotomy. If I'm getting drunk and drinking, they must be right. Nothing could be further from the truth. And I've seen people try to argue with me about, okay, maybe it is all bullshit, but it's bullshit that makes people happy. I'm going to say I don't think anybody in there is happy. I really don't. I mean, I've not seen anybody outside of the ones that's got the starry-eyed, I'm so spiritual and wonderful crowd. And when you actually get to know them in their personal lives, like I got to know a few of them, they're almost some of the most malicious people I've ever seen. I remember one lady that used to, she would always say she was about love and tolerance and all this other stuff. And she had this starry-eyed look in her face, like she was just so spiritual the world could not touch her. She was the default guru of all the women in one of the meetings I went to. And I remember right around the time she had a sponsee who was pregnant, and she started going out with her sponsee's boyfriend, and he ends up leaving his pregnant girlfriend for her. And she's sitting in meetings talking about how spiritual she is today. And I'm sitting there looking around in the room like this, and I'm thinking, does anybody else in here not see what I'm seeing? I mean, you had someone who trusted you with their life. You had someone who was pregnant and trusted you with their life, and you took their boyfriend away from them. And you're hailed as some great guru in here. I mean, that's what I saw underneath the surface of damn near everybody in there. It's not an isolated incident. And people who would say things like, go to other meetings. I mean, well, you go to other meetings, you run and encounter the same thing. So I'm going to sum it. I've still got so much more I want to talk about. And it's already 27 minutes in. The opposite of addiction is truly connection. Okay, I agree with that article. And if I can find it, I'll post it. And the opposite of addiction is finding some kind of positive outlet in your life that does something for you, that helps you, overcome that addiction. But going out and seeking a connection in a cult of self-abasement that's run by the most malignant narcissists I've ever come across in my entire life. I swear the books I've read on serial killers does not touch just how malignant these people really were. But that's not going to be a connection that's going to help you overcome your addiction. That's going to be a connection that's going to drag you down. It's going to drag you down in a lot more ways than you even realize. I did not know just how depressed I was during those last 5 years of AA. I did not realize how much of that creeping depression in my life was as a result of it. Because I was a desperately unhappy guy, even when I wasn't drinking or drunk. I was desperately miserable. I was angry all the time. I was upset all the time. I thought about killing myself on more than one occasion. And when I first left the cult, here's a weird tidbit, but I feel it's very important for people out there who are leaving or considering leaving. When I first left the cult, in spite of how miserable I was, in spite of how upset I was at everything, in spite of the fact I really wanted to die, I mean, it was really that bad. There was a gaping hole inside of me, like, oh my God, I'm out there. I'm in that mystical place they all sit there and talk about, like some weird horror movie where the people are out there, Well, I was out there and I didn't know what I was going to do. And within about, I'm going to say a good 6 months, I'm going to say it took a good 6 months before all of a sudden I realized that what I had in there was just not worth even thinking about going back to. I mean, the depression is gone. The suicidal ideation is gone. The desire to be drunk all the time is gone because I don't dwell on my addiction 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I don't inventory myself all the time. But the snake oil, to me, is the most heinous aspect of this because you rook a lot of innocent, well-meaning people into these rooms and you twist and destroy their lives under the pretense of trying to make some connection in order to help overcome your addictions. It destroys people's lives. I mean, I make that as a bold claim, if you want to call it that. But I stand behind that, and I'm going to keep plugging away with these videos to keep proving it, hopefully. Uh, anyway, I've only just scratched the surface of what I want to talk about, and it's 30 minutes in, so I probably lost all my viewers by this point anyway. So I'll see you guys next week.